What's up, skeptics? Welcome to a live episode of Reason to Doubt. I am Jordan, joined by Jared. How you going?
Hey,
How's it going, Jared?
it's going well. This way, everybody will get to see how much we mess up and edit our stuff and how unprofessional we really are. So,
Right. You can see every and hopefully we won't curse. Like YouTube freaks out if you curse within the first 5 minutes. So we'll try to restrain from doing that. So today we are going to be talking about a variety of topics. We have a whole laundry list of topics that we've thought of and people have suggested, and a lot of them we didn't think would fit for a whole episode. So we thought it might be fun to hit some things that the audience had suggested to us. And so we're going to talk about three things today. We're going to talk about ball lightning. We're going to talk about medieval sleeping habits. That's at the tip of everyone's tongue, right at the forefront. And then the third one is cryptids, like Bigfoot and stuff, but mainly focusing on the study of cryptids, cryptozoology and cryptozoology, and
yeah.
whether or not it's real science.
Yeah, and these are all, like you said, user submitted topics. I don't know if we want to call them out and thank them for submitting these topics, but we'll do that when we get to them.
Yeah, we'll do it as we go to them.
Cool.
So without further ado, we'll jump into the first one. The first one we're going to talk about is segmented sleep or biphasic sleeping. This one was suggested by one homeschooler, which is actually my mom. So hi, Mom. And
no nepotism here. We just
100% nepotism, 100%. Okay, so currently, people in Western cultures tend to sleep in a single block, and they sleep for about 6 to 8 hours a night. If you're weak, if you don't recognize it for the waste of time that it is, in which case you sleep a lot less. But there is a claim that goes around that this is new in human history. And prior to the Industrial Revolution, with its ever-present electric light, people used to sleep in 2 shifts or more. So they'd sleep for 3 or 4 hours. They'd wake up in the middle of the night. And they'd go back to sleep afterwards. And while they were awake, they'd do chores. They'd visit neighbors. They'd, do other things.
Tend to the fire to make sure it didn't go out at night.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or tend to that fire. Yeah.
Heyo.
Heyo.
So, and then they'd go back to sleep. And so you can find this claim being repeated everywhere. I found dozens of articles in newspapers and magazines from the BBC to the Atlantic, all over the place, this claim being repeated. And it's not hard to see why. I mean, it's a very compelling story, right? You've got this thing that everybody has experience with. Hi, Mom. You have this thing that everybody has experience with, sleeping, and some more than others. And but you've got the evil progress of technology that has shifted us from our natural state. It's a great narrative. And so it's easy to see why it's been repeated a lot. And what's more interesting about the story is that we've had this huge change, but it happened so subtly that nobody even noticed, right?
Yeah, it's like electricity happened, and then all of a sudden, it's well, I guess I don't need to wake up in the middle of the night anymore. So
I guess, and nobody wrote it down or anything. What gets me out of the story is there was at least some period of time where people were used to doing this thing, and everyone had always done it this way.
Yeah, and it's not like the grid was laid out overnight. It was you would have had phases of this. So,
but anyway, okay. So you can see it everywhere, and what you'll notice if you start digging into these, you'll see them talking about the same kind of claims, and they'll talk about researchers, they'll talk about studies. But what you should always do whenever you see these things is try to find the actual citation, find the researcher or the study. And the good sites will link it and give you a link or at least a citation at the bottom. The bad ones, not so much.
And even that, if you trace the sites, right? Just keep going down the rabbit trail till you get to the original source.
Keep going until you find a paper. And if you do that, what you'll find is that all of them are citing one guy. This guy, Roger Ekirch, Ekirch. So this is a life lesson. it's easy for one piece of research, or in this case, many pieces of research, but all produced by one gentleman, to spawn dozens, if not hundreds, of pop level articles, right? So just because you see a claim repeated over and over and over and over again doesn't mean there's a mountain of research behind it. It just means that there's some kind of something that is clickable or, makes a good headline or whatever, and that's why it gets repeated. But there is a guy who did some research. So who is this guy? He is a professor at Virginia Tech. He is a historian. He's not a biologist, or I don't know what's someone who studies sleep, a sleepologist, whatever, a doctor probably. But in any case,
a zoologist.
Yeah. So this guy's a historian, and like this is his thing. This is his like favorite topic. This is what he's staked his like entire career on at this point since the early 90s. And so the Cliff Notes version of the story is that he was writing about something else, and he was going to write a chapter on sleep in the Middle Ages, and he expected to be pretty boring because, how much could sleep have changed? And he was reading a court deposition from the 17th century in which a woman named Mrs. Routh was murdered. Routh's daughter, Jane, reported that her and her mother had just risen from their first sleep. The mother, Routh, told Jane to go back to bed, and then she went to leave the house on some errand, met some people, whatever, and she never returned. Bum, bum, bum.
SVU back in the Middle Ages.
Yeah. I guess 17th century is a little late for the Middle Ages, but...
sorry. Yeah.
Anyway, so she died. And what struck Ekirk about this was that term, first sleep, and the fact that like these people had gotten up to go do something and nobody thought this was weird. It was just treated as like, this is the thing. She got up from her first sleep and went and did stuff. And that was all it was. And Ekirk relates that he often finds court documents useful because they tend to report mundane details like this if you're paying attention. And so he started looking all over the place for other details and started seeing them everywhere in the historical record. People talking about a first sleeper getting up in the night for a watch or whatever. Just scattered all up and down the historical record. Most of his research is focused on medieval England, but he said he found references to segmented sleep, or biphasic sleep is what he calls it, as far back as like the Odyssey and the Iliad. So he quotes the Iliad. The line he quotes is, "The hour which terminates the first sleep, when the car of night has yet but performed half its course." Now, I found a copy, so I saw that. Whenever I see someone quote a document or a book, I go check the book to see if they're actually quoting it, because you might be surprised how often people are just repeating something that somebody else quoted and not like actually getting the real quote, or missing the context or something. The one I found didn't seem to indicate that people were getting up. The copy I found said, "Sleep refreshes our weary limbs. Night, led by the hours, is not yet in its mid-course." Then a guy Palinurus rises alertly from his couch, tests all the winds, and listens to the breeze. So he's like getting up to do stuff. So maybe it's in the middle of the night. Maybe it's after they slept. I'm willing to chalk this one up to translation, because presumably Ekirk, being a professional historian, is like reading it in Latin, whereas I'm reading some translation. So, whatever. I have to take his word for it there. Another one he cites is the Canterbury Tales. So and this is another thing that was super annoying when I was looking into this, is like everyone was like, "Hey, in the Canterbury Tales, I talk about segmented sleep," but nobody would say anything more than that. Which I'm not going to read.
Where in the tales are there? Because I'm not reading them all.
There's a lot of Canterbury Tales, you guys, and it's not exactly a light read, And so I dug harder, and eventually someone said it was the Squire's Tale, and it referenced first sleep. And I read the whole Squire's Tale, and again, the translation I had didn't say a single word about first sleep. But here's what was happening. The one I was reading was translated into modern English and called it beauty sleep. But I found another translation that that was preserving more of the old English, and that one did call it first sleep. So there you go. So the character, just so nobody else, if for some reason you really want to find this, it's in the Squire's Tale. The character is named Canace, Canace. She sleeps her first sleep, and then she awakes and does stuff. And so and Ekirk has like dozens of these examples, and he says that this is basically the foundation of his theory. This is what he's saying suggests that human sleep was like this at some point in the past. So, but the thing is, he's the only guy that's really talking about it. Like, it's just Ekirk has published a lot, and to be fair, this is not a lot of the stuff we cover here is like crackpot stuff, and it's people publishing in like weird fringe journals or people who aren't credentialed or whatever. This is a legit historian doing history, publishing in historical journals, so all that's like above board, right? But it's still just one guy.
Mhm.
So he does cite a couple studies, or really he cites one study. If he talks about it different ways, but if you like read his work, he's always going back to the same study. It was one done by the National Institute of Mental Health in 1992 by Ware, and it was called "In Short Photo Periods, Human Sleep is Biphasic." And so this is so Ekirk will say, "Look, I found all these historical references, and there's a study that shows that this is the natural state of sleep." And so in this study, what Ware did is he took. So the way you'll hear it is like they did a study with all these volunteers. With all these volunteers, and like they all slept this way when they were put in natural conditions. Here's what actually happened. To answer David's question, I don't know because I didn't go and read all of Shakespeare and Chaucer, but I did not see anywhere where Ekirk mentioned them, and I think he would. If it was in Shakespeare, I'm pretty sure Ekirk would put that front and center. There was like one paper I read by him that was in response to another paper I'm about to talk to. He was a little snippy about it. It was kind of ruffled his feathers because it, contradicted his research, and he didn't like that. So I feel like if it was in Shakespeare, he would have said it there, but I can't say for sure. So anyways, here's what happened. So Ware in the 90s took 7 people, and he wanted to test basically what would happen if people were exposed to much less light and kind of didn't have distractions. Like what that would do to their sleep. So they were allowed for 10 hours a day to move freely about the cabin, go inside, outside, whatever they wanted to do. For the remaining 14 hours of the day, they were confined to a dark bedroom. They weren't allowed to exercise. They couldn't listen to music. They couldn't do anything like that. They were encouraged to just lay about and rest, right? So 14 hours in the dark with nothing to do. And after some time in those conditions, they began to sleep more, like about an hour more. But more importantly, their sleep was split into 2 roughly equal bouts with 1 to 3 hours of wakefulness in the middle. And Ware points out that this sleeping pattern is more similar to the sleeping pattern in some primates, some mammals like chimps. And so he postulated this is the natural state of human sleeping, absent natural light.
Okay. I mean, that's the only study he did?
Yeah, so far as I could tell, I didn't see anything where Ware had done another follow-up study or anyone had like reproduced his things. And it's kind of funny. It got cited like I think I wrote down the number in here. It's in my notes somewhere. I don't see it. I'll bring it up if I see it again later. But it got cited like 5 times,
like a lot.
Not much. Which, yeah, very very little. And a bunch of those citations were like decades later in 2014. Which so that doesn't mean he's wrong. Doesn't mean his research is bad. What that tells you, kind of like a clue when you're evaluating a paper. The things I look at when I look at a paper, I start by looking at the journal. Is the journal in the master's journal list or some other reputable list of journals, right? That tells you that's like a very low bar because like the Institute for Creation Research journal is in that list. So like, and that's nonsense. But like if it doesn't clear even that, right, then it's probably bogus. So I look at that. I look at its impact factor. The impact factor is basically how many people cite the papers in this journal. The more people cite papers in this journal, the more popular it is, right? I look at whether it's open access. There are good open access journals, but if it's open access, like if it's a predatory journal, it's probably open access. Not all open access journals are predatory, but many aren't. We talked about that in a previous episode. And another thing you want to look at for a particular paper is how often it was cited and who was citing it and why. right? A lot of times when you see a website, you can see like all the different citations. If it's cited by a whole bunch of people like who are using it for their research, that indicates that it was like had impact in its
Right.
in its field, and like other experts saw it as valuable. If it's not being cited, or if it's like being cited by the same guy, like he's citing his own research, not that there's nothing wrong with that, but if like you see a lot of times you'll see like if a guy's like his pet theory, he cites himself over and over, and he's basically the only one citing his stuff.
Right.
You know, it again, it doesn't mean he's wrong, but it does tell you that like the people in his field don't see this research as particularly impactful or meaningful. Right.
So we've talked about this in the past when we've talked about other, scientific studies and surveys. One of the biggest things is the sample size. So the larger the sample size, the better the outcomes you can draw from that.
Mm-hmm.
This was just a sample size of 7, right? That's pretty small.
Yes, 7 people, so extremely small sample size. Typical for like a preliminary study like this, but it's still 7 people. Yeah. Other issues like daytime is 10 hours long in the winter in some temperate zones, but it's much longer in the summer. Is it just a winter thing? Also, another thing is like people had nothing to do at all during these circumstances, which like that's not necessarily how primeval humans would have been. And I know, like for me, and this is a sample size of 1, so it's even worse. But like when I had COVID, like, and I was just basically laying around all day, my sleep schedule was all screwed up. Like I'd sleep for 2 hours, then wake up, then sleep for another 4, and like it was just kind of So I'm not necessarily to count as like natural sleep patterns,
Right.
If you see Bigfoot outside your window, Anarchist, there might be other things that are interfering with your sleep. Yeah, so there's some issues with this study. But here's the thing. Whenever you like, again, dozens of articles citing Ekirk, and if they talked about a study, they only talked about this one. And so like this entire like edifice is built on this one thing. It's funny. I was going through the citations of Weir's research, and one of the papers that cited it, Chang et al., considering cross-cultural differences in sleep duration between Japanese and Canadian university students, and they were like looking at sleep patterns across different cultures, and they stated like in their opening that like cultures now have monophasic sleep, but like hey, in the past they used to have biphasic sleep, and they cited guess who? Ekirk, the same guy.
So they cited this paper who was testing the 7 people, and this was enough for them to cite that humans in the past had biphasic sleep, right?
Yeah,
that's pretty thin ice.
Yeah, it seems like thin ice to me. But it's funny because they cited like Ekirk and this other thing, but then they said, but see this other paper. So let's say Ekirk's right. Okay. Let's say that he is correct, his hypothesis that humans used to sleep segmented sleeping, and they no longer do. I mean, it's trivial that like biphasic sleeping is a thing. There are siesta cultures that like typically sleep in a nap in the mid-afternoon. That's technically biphasic sleeping because it's like they get their sleep in 2 different periods. But he's really talking about segmented
nighttime.
At nighttime, right? So let's say he's right, and that is like the natural state of human sleeping. But because of the Industrial Revolution with electric lights or whatever, that's not how people sleep anymore, right? What would the prediction be?
So the prediction would be that if you removed the artificial lights and the modern technologies that have us like that, we would be the humans would go back to this biphasic type of sleeping, right? Because that's our natural state.
Right. The prediction would be if you went to a culture that was pre-industrial, they would have this biphasic, this segmented sleeping.
Man, if only there was pre-industrial culture still around today.
Yeah, man. Shame. We might have to bomb somebody back into the Stone Age. No, of course there are pre-industrial cultures in the world. So, hey, good news is we've got cultures we can test this hypothesis on right now. Bad news, we did it, and they don't sleep that way. So Yedish et al. In Current Biology 2015, they published natural sleep and its seasonal variations in 3 pre-industrial societies. And so, like the study suggests, they looked at 3 societies: the Hadza in Tanzania, I'm going to butcher this, the Semani, I think, in Bolivia, and the San in Namibia. Jesus. Okay. Not going to try them again. Look up the paper. So these are true pre-industrial societies. They have no electricity at all. So they don't have any heating and cooling. They have no lights, and they live that way their whole lives. That like this is their entire existence.
I
Right.
actually have some familiar with the Hadza because they've been used in quite a bit of studies for like hunter gatherer kind of research and stuff. So
Right. It's really cool to like have cultures like that you can almost get a window to like our past. Obviously, they're not identical to our ancient past, but there's going to be some similarities, same
mhm.
people, similar conditions. So anyway, yeah. So what they found in studying the sleep patterns of these people is that they slept 7 to 8.5 hours on average, about the same as people in industrial cultures. They began their sleep about 3 hours after sunset, and they awoke before sunrise. They didn't get up in the middle of the night any more than anyone else does.
Unless they were a 60-year-old man with some prostate issues, and then
Right. Like some
yep,
people obviously do, but like it wasn't
yep,
like a thing where they all
yeah,
got up. Um, and they didn't even nap more than Western people do. They napped a little bit in the winter, and about 20% of the days in the summer they might have had a nap, which is, not that weird for just people. So where do we stand on this? Uh, on the one hand, Ekirk does have a lot, and I mean a mountain, of suggestive texts from the Middle Ages and further back that kind of like hint at this segmented sleeping thing. And while they are only hinting at it, it's not it you have to remember like nobody's saying like, "Hey, this is how we sleep," because why would they?
yeah,
Like if everybody is truly doing this, it's one of those it's actually kind of a thing in history where it can be hard to figure out like mundane things because if they're mundane nobody talks about them because there's no need to talk about them.
right,
Um so that the only way you're going to get them is passing references. So like you've got all of these references which are kind of suggestive, and there's one study of a small sample size, but it is suggestive that maybe this is the way humans sleep, and it is how other mammals sleep, and we're just mammals, you and me, baby, nothing but mammals. But it does come with a prediction, and the one time the prediction's been tested, it didn't work. Now that is just one study studying just 3 cultures, so maybe it was a cultural thing. Maybe kind of
yeah.
like there's siesta cultures. Maybe there used to be segmented sleep cultures, and that
Or
was just
maybe there was an actual, utilitarian reason that they had to get up in the middle of the night for whatever it was. So, um,
right. Uh, Ianarchus says in those primitive societies, there was almost always someone awake at any one time. If you read the study, a lot of the times when they were talking about nighttime activities, it was like tending the fire and stuff like that. So,
yeah,
um, yeah. So it doesn't necessarily mean that Ekirk is wrong. That But what it could mean is perhaps he's mistaken about like the prevalence. Maybe it isn't just the way humans are, but it could have been the way one culture was, and that's what he's seeing. It could be he's just reading too much into it. But basically, it's inconclusive at best.
yeah. It's an interesting thought, and I mean, if there is some supporting evidence, but from what you've demonstrated, if that's all that's out there, that's not enough to conclusively state that this is how all humans have slept
Right. Right.
into up until the Industrial Revolution,
Which
which
is
is
the
the conclusion.
tagline. If
Yeah,
you read these articles, it's like, one thing, the way humans used to sleep, the answer will shock you.
yeah.
Okay.
Upside down. Yeah.
All right, so that's medieval sleep, and you can now put that burning question to rest. So let's move on to ball lightning. So this one was suggested by Overinator. We mentioned it in passing when we were talking about crop circles because it's often talked about in the same sentences as crop circles. And we said we might talk about it more. We might talk more about it later. And now's later. Later is now. The future is now. So, what is ball lightning?
It's a spell that you can cast in Dungeons and Dragons. No,
Mhm.
that's not what
Is
this
it?
is.
Chain
I don't know.
lightning is
It's
a spell.
what should be. It should be a spell.
Is it I don't think it is.
I
I
was just
don't
making a joke, but
It might be. Maybe
yeah.
in some versions. Okay. But anyway, in real life, ball lightning is an allegedly like a rare phenomena where like there's a ball of lightning, kind of pretty much exactly how it sounds. Usually it's like 10 to 20 centimeters, um, sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller. Some typical characteristics is it's moving. it's either like floating or it's bouncing or rolling or in some way moving, not being blown by the wind, kind of on its own power or whatever. It's often associated with lightning strikes, not always. So people like report seeing them at like crop circles and like haunted houses or whatever, but they're often seen with lightning strikes. One story, one of the like the earliest reference from the 17th century is like there's like you can see a painting of it, like the ball like flies through the window and catches the table on fire. You know, very dramatic.
Pretty cool.
Would be cool. So it's weird, and you see people talking about ball lightning in the context of the paranormal all the time, right? They talk about it. That there are books published on like crop circles, and they'll be published on like the paranormal crop circles, ball lightning, alien abductions. Like it's in that same thing. And so you've got the usual suspects, a few vague sightings, some shaky cam footage. You've got some papers published in like pseudoscience journals or whatever. And like that's all I was expecting to find. I was expecting it to be one and done, just like another case of people making stuff up. But boy, was I wrong. There's like papers published in like real, reliable in Nature, you guys. In the Nature family of journals, there's papers published by like actual scientists, multiple scientific teams across the country. Like ball lightning is real, you guys. Like for real. Like I'm not joking. Like it's a real phenomenon. It's crazy. So just so you don't take my word for it, let's talk about like the actual evidence, right? Okay, so let's start with like how common it is, because it's rare, right? Everyone knows it's rare. How rare is it? How rare is it? How rare do you think it is?
I would think it's pretty dang rare because I never heard of it until the episode we did on crop circles, and it was only in that context. So I'm gonna say maybe, I don't know, 20% or less occurrence. I don't know. I have no idea.
So the number you see reported all over the place is that 5% of the population has seen ball lightning, which is actually a sizable chunk. It's like
Like
one
a
in
half a
20
million,
people.
half a billion people. Like,
Don't get ahead of the show, David of Oakland. We're getting there. so, so yeah, so about 5% is what they report. Here's the thing. That reference, that 5% number, comes from the preliminary report on ball lightning put out by Oak Ridge National Labs in 1966. Now that's a super credible source, right? For physics. Oak Ridge National Labs, totally legit. When you're reading through it, you find that they did a survey on page 10 of the PDF. If you Google it up, they did a survey. They have a sample of 1,962 people, almost 2,000 people, decent sized survey. And
more than 7.
Yep, slight. Hold on, where's my calculator? I think it is slightly more than 7. Yeah, 5.6% of that survey had found ball lightning. So that's great. The sample, Oak Ridge National Labs personnel.
Right. So they sampled their own personnel.
They like walked around the office and like, you know. So that's not great. That's not a good sample size. You know, like it's a good sample size. It's not going to be a statistically like
yeah, and could you imagine you're sitting in your cubicle and your boss comes around, I need you to answer this question. Like
yeah, there's like all kinds of problems with this sample, right? Don't worry though. They reference another one, broader sample, 16,000 people. Super great. That one had 3.1% prevalence. And that one was from Union Carbide Nuclear Company personnel. Again, they just like wandered around the office and asked 16,000 people, I guess. This is not how you do surveys. It's terrible. Like there's in the 60s, if you're like at Oak Ridge National Labs or at this nuclear company, that sample is going to be predominantly white, predominantly male, probably older, richer, educate. Like there's all kinds of reasons this is not a statistically like credible sample. So who the hell knows how common it is? This is how common it is. Rare enough that most people haven't seen it, right? So
there you go.
Yeah. Okay, so it's rare. But there are some papers that talk about it. So some of them are just kind of collecting stories. One of those that's kind of emblematic of that is The Birth of Ball Lightning in 2012 by Loke et al. And this one talks about like pilots. It basically collects some anecdotes of pilots two of them that were like Air Force pilots and like in a cruise. Like one was in what's the one with the dish on the top?
I forget what that's called. E10. I don't know.
AWACS.
I don't know.
I think it's an AWACS.
I should know that.
Yeah. Didn't you used to work on aircraft?
Yeah, I should definitely know that.
Yeah. So yeah. Anyways, according to them, like they were flying around. One was in the storm, one wasn't, and like a ball of lightning like appeared just inside the windshield and like just like wandered around the cockpit and then flew like disappeared. Crazy, you know. So Scott has been criticizing my t-shirt choices like every episode. I'm gonna have to like subcontract my wardrobe to
Have
the
we not
audience.
told Scott how you pick out t-shirts?
I think we did, but just so everybody knows, the way I pick out the tie by like I look at the ties I have, I kind of try to think of the topic and I like put some thought into that usually. The way I pick out t-shirts is I open the drawer, I reach my hand in, it's like a claw machine. Whatever the first t-shirt it touches is, that's what I wear. Yeah. So okay, so those are just anecdotes, and the purpose of that paper was mainly like this guy, his model was that like static electricity collecting on windshields was leading to ball lightning. And
So like the electricity's getting up in the turbulence and it's
yeah. So
Yeah,
he
who
kind of
knows?
wanted anecdotes that fit that, you know, whatever. But I'm going to cut to the chase. Let's get to the really good one. This is the one that like convinces me ball lightning is for sure real, because like, okay, the other ones, some Air Force people saw it, multiple people saw it. That's reasonably credible, but eyewitnesses can be wrong, as we've talked about. But there's a really, really good one. Sen et al. In 2014, observation of the optical and spectral characteristics of ball lightning. So this research is reporting an event in 2012. And what's cool is that these guys were not going out to see ball lightning. They were just looking at lightning. They went to a place that's like known to have wicked lightning storms, and they were studying the spectrographic lines of lightning to better understand that. Because by the way, guys, we don't really understand how lightning works, which is weird. It's one of those things that like seems like we should have this figured out, you know?
It's pretty cool actually. So.
It is pretty cool. Maybe we should do an episode on that. Maybe
Yeah.
we can get I actually know a meteorologist. Maybe she could talk about it. Once she's kind of busy, she just had a baby. Anyways, Scott is a big meanie. I agree. He should stop insulting my my t-shirt selection. He says he's looking out for my brand, but we know better. So anyways, yeah, so they were just like, they had their camera, they had their spectrograph and everything, and they happened to capture ball lightning on camera.
Whoa, we have actual videographic evidence.
We do. So let me pull up the paper so you guys can see the picture. That's not the paper. That's the thing. I've got it. I'll show you the picture in my show notes real quick.
And David did confirm that it was AWACS, so you were not mistaken.
Good. So this is a screen grab from the paper. This is the spectral lines of the lightning. This is the spectral lines of the ball lightning. And this right here is the ball lightning. That little dot, that little guy. This is the spectrographic lines from 20 milliseconds after. So the lightning's gone. Ball lightning, not gone.
Still there.
So that's pretty cool. So they saw the ball lightning. It has a distinct spectrum, and it persists longer than the lightning itself. And then here you've got pictures of the ball lightning taken by their camera. Now they are kind of fuzzy because they weren't going to look at ball lightning. They just happened to capture it, and it was like a kilometer away. So, you know, not the highest def of cameras, but some things that jumped out at me when I was reading this. First of all, they said that the spectral lines were similar to what you see in the soil. So that supported a model. I'll talk about that in a second. But they said one would expect, if this model was correct, that aluminum would be present given its abundance of soil minerals. But we can't confirm that because our devices weren't set up to capture those spectral lines. None of the spectral lines of neutral aluminum fit within the band of our material. They said that there may be more than one type of ball lightning. There may be more than one mechanism of ball lightning. And our observation is only one event that may not be representative of the entire group, the entire phenomena set. And they also go into excruciating detail about the time, the place, the exact camera, the model, at what angle they had it set up, at what position, doing what. Like they went, it was like a page of just like, here is every single thing about what we did. And all of these things combined to like kind of pass the smell test of a paper. If
Right.
you read enough scientific papers, you kind of get a feel for how they sound, right? And like a legitimate paper tends to be very reserved. They tend to clarify and caveat the things they say, and they also tend to have really well laid out methods. Those are all signs of good papers. So Chris Kiefer tells us that he's seen ball lightning, came in the kitchen through his window during a thunderstorm and blew out the stove.
There you
go.
100% confirmed proof.
100%. I actually know him in person, so I'm sure he's not lying. Doesn't mean he's correct, but he probably is.
We'll probably get into that later.
What is it? So what is ball lightning? We've established now it is real. A bunch of people seen it, and it's been captured by like for realsy scientists using science stuff. It's been captured. It's real. So what is it? Well, nobody knows. That's the thing. Like, it's still a mystery. There are a couple models. So one model is that ball lightning occurs when a lightning strike hits the ground and it vaporizes some of the silicate minerals in the soil. And I'm getting this from the article I cited, the Chinese one, the kind of like popular level summary that the journal puts out. This is what they describe. So it vaporizes silicate materials in the soil. Carbon in the soil strips the silicates of oxygen through chemical reactions, and they basically react with the oxygen to release heat and then glow, and it glows for a little while. And if that is true, you should expect to see the spectral lines of silicon and other soil elements in the spectrum, which is what the researchers saw. If you're not aware what spectral lines are, it's not ghosts. When elements are excited, when they are like vibrating with energy, and they release that energy, they only release certain wavelengths, certain defined wavelengths, and that is because of quantum mechanics. Energy, the electrons, when they drop from a higher energy level to a lower energy level, it's not like a continuous like spectrum. They're like discrete spots that they can drop into, and the gap, the amount of energy they need to drop to go from one higher level to a lower one, is discrete, and that's the amount of energy they'll emit.
Gotcha.
So if you see, you can look at the light emitted, and because of the wavelengths of light that are emitted, you can tell what elements are present. And they do that in like stars and stuff. So you can like look at a star with the right equipment, doing some math to accommodate redshift and everything, and you can say what elements make up that star, a million light years away.
I guess for our purposes though, like if we have this phenomenon that's not very well understood, right? And so we're already on the fringe of what our knowledge is, and that opens up the playground for imaginations to run wild, right? So like,
yeah. So like, all of this does not mean that all of the sightings of ball lightning are true and correct. Like, it doesn't mean, oh, I saw ball lightning at a crop circle, and therefore, like, because ball lightning is a real thing, that means that the person who said they saw it at a crop circle is correct,
right,
or accurate or whatever. Like, there can still be plenty of nonsense reports of ball lightning, even if it is a real thing, right? And we don't know how it's made. So one of the ideas is that lightning strike thing that I just talked about. Another idea is that microwaves could of a particular wavelength could basically be just the right size for a standing wave, and a standing wave is like if you like pull a string taut or something and it like vibrates. If it's held so that at the right
distance.
spot, so that the distance is one wavelength, then instead of like traveling, it'll just like oscillate back and forth. You can like see it. That's a standing wave. So maybe some microwaves are containing the energy in a standing wave so that it's like persisting for a little while. And that is backed up by some papers that were published where researchers recreated a thing that looked kind of like ball lightning using that. So, fireball ejection from a molten hot spot to air by localized microwaves. That's a pretty sick title for a paper. That was published in 2006, and they did exactly that. They used microwaves to basically create a ball of plasma that like bounced around and floated and stuff, and kind of like acted how ball lightning is said to act. So, that's plausible. At the end of the day, we don't know. We don't know what causes ball lightning, and it could be multiple different phenomena that are kind of bundled in because they kind of look the same, and whatever. So there might be multiple different things that are causing it. But it is real, which again, I did not anticipate coming to that conclusion. I thought for sure it was going to be bullshit. So
I think that's an important point to hit home, though, right? So we came to this with you had a preconceived idea that this was just going to be pseudoscience stuff. You looked into it some more, as a good skeptic should, and lo and behold, there is some credibility to it. While it's not 100% certain, like there's something there, and so we can.
There's enough credible reports that I feel confident saying it's a actual phenomena that exists.
Right.
I can't say much more than that, but it's been witnessed in the kind of things you'd look for. It's published in peer-reviewed journals by scientists speaking in their field. The observations are such that it's hard to see how they could be faked or incorrect, like spectrography is well established. It's not like a new thing. Like this is extremely well understood technology. So it's not like, but this is well within the bounds. Even though this particular thing is not understood, it was detected with extremely well vetted technology and techniques.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
That's cool. Ball lightning. Yeah, pretty cool. It is not often on this channel that I go in to debunk something and it turns out that it was true the whole time. Not often. So that's fun.
But it's good to know that you're not stuck in your ways and you're open to being changed, Jordan. So.
Well, this again was just to lull people into a false insecurity. This was specifically to bolster my reputation. It's 43 minutes in, so nobody's watching anymore, and so I can tell you the secret plan, which is that this was purely to make people think that I'm honest about the other things that I want to lie about.
Well, let's lie about a few more things. Let's lie about cryptids.
Yeah, let's lie about some Bigfoot. So the last thing we're going to talk about is cryptids. I did not write down who suggested this one. Not sure, so my bad on that one. You know who you are, though.
Yeah, if it was you, claim it, and we'll give you credit. So,
and yeah, I have no memory of who it was. So if you say it was you, I'll believe you. So there you go.
Well, first of all, we should probably define what a cryptid is, right? So a cryptid is basically an animal or creature whose existence isn't really recognized by science yet or mainstream society. So typically, these creatures are often the subject of like folklore, legend. They're talked about in myths, and their existence is mostly based on eyewitness or anecdotal evidence rather than actual scientific evidence, and they haven't been studied by the sciences yet. So,
well, the plural of anecdote is data, right? The more, if you have enough anecdotes, that means it's true.
Oh, there you go. So the claim though is for this one was pretty interesting because most of these animals are believed to be real by the
cryptozoologists.
Cryptozoologists, people who study these things who aren't actually real. They're
they're called cryptozoologists and not zoologists because the stuff they study typically isn't real.
It's like, what do you call alternate medicine that works? You call it medicine.
Medicine, yeah. Exactly.
So
I thought this would be interesting to look at, not necessarily from the like going into a super deep dive on debunking Bigfoot, but more talking about the field of cryptozoology, whether or not it's a pseudoscience, because it's not always wrong.
Yeah, which we will find. We'll get examples of this.
So let's start by talking about some like cryptids that everyone knows about, right? So first one, if you're talking about cryptids, the first one that comes to mind is Bigfoot.
Also known as Sasquatch.
Also known as Sasquatch, right. So Bigfoot, if somehow you don't know, it's allegedly a large ape-like creature, and it is said to inhabit the North America, specifically the Pacific Northwest, and basically where people aren't. Wherever it's remote enough that you wouldn't see one walking down the sidewalk, that's where they are, allegedly. And they usually report it as being super big, like 6-10 feet tall, covered in hair, kind of human shaped like a big ape, basically. Yeah, it is the North American cousin. It is the freedom loving version of a Yeti. Yeah.
Except for, I don't think Bigfoots are reported to have like magical powers though. Like whereas Yeti are typically have like magical powers. But
that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit different folklore, but
yeah,
kind of similar creature, at least. So.
Well, let's give a little brief history on the Bigfoot, the anti-Yeti. So these stories go back a long time to the indigenous communities in the Pacific Northwest. But the modern era of Bigfoot research actually began in the 50s. And this is when a series of tracks were discovered near Bluff Creek, California. And this is probably started like people going out and actually looking for these Bigfoot sightings. So it got some popularity.
And in the 60s, two guys named Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin, they were in California they were looking for evidence of Bigfoot. They were looking in the Bluff Creek region because a lot of Bigfoot sightings have been seen there. And they claim to have caught it on camera. And this, if you've seen footage of Bigfoot, you've seen
this is the guy who's like walking. He's like
looking over his shoulder, right. And like, so if you ever seen like the Ancient Aliens or the history one, like they do a super close zoomed up version of this, right? And like it's kind of shaky cam and whatever. And so it looks like, okay, maybe that could be a Bigfoot. I'm gonna pull up. People have stabilized that footage, so they've like done some video processing to colorize it and to like stitch together the frames and then put it on a stable background so like you can actually tell what the hell's going on, and it's way funnier this way. So let me present again. All right, so this is that footage that you've all seen but stabilized. That's clearly just a dude, right? That's clearly just a dude in a monkey suit. Like
that is a gorilla suit, yeah, for sure. And a guy walking.
Look at that. Like this is just a dude out for a stroll. Like, and he looks at the camera. That's what he's like. Da, 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 and now I should look at the thing. Like.
Yeah.
It's way less convincing.
Well, because they knew that wasn't going to be as convincing enough. They actually found large sets of tracks in the area, and so these tracks were about 16 inches long and 7 inches wide. So these were like the footprints, multiple feet prints of the Bigfoot, and these are the ones you've seen. They took cast of them, and so this is the thing. So it wasn't just the footage; they had feet prints as well.
Now
I keep saying feet prints, but it's footprints.
These casts have not convinced paleoanthropologists, which is the field they need to convince. Right. Maybe if we ever do a deep dive, maybe I'll get Erica to come, Gutsit Gibbon, and opine on the legitimacy of Bigfoot,
because that is her specialty is primates,
field, yeah.
Right? So she would know about this, yeah.
Yeah, if she can get a word out edgewise between laughing, then maybe we can do an episode of that. But anyway, it hasn't convinced anybody, and the thing that like convinces me without like doing a super deep dive of this is like, okay, in the 50s it was like a thing. In the 60s they had one camera. There are people like going all over the place. Yes, I do know Erica. I'm not claiming that she's going to come on this channel. I just like, maybe I will. No promises. She's a very busy woman.
Yes.
Anyways, so since the 50s, like people have been going out there, but like now, like Bigfoot hunting is like a thing people do. And like, okay, maybe before people wouldn't have seen it, but now you've got legions of people crawling over these forests and every single one of them has a high definition camera in their pocket at all times.
Right. And not to mention we have helicopters and drones with infrared cameras where we can actually look for heat signatures where these things would live. Yeah. So
like, I'm not saying it's impossible, but like, certainly it seems like the credibility, the plausibility that this big lumbering creature would have escaped notice all this time. That's stretching credulity.
Yeah, and all the evidence we do have is mostly anecdotal. Um, and the ones that we don't have don't really hold up to scientific,
And there's like
examination.
even people who are like big dyed in the wool Bigfoot believers will admit that the field is full of hoaxes.
Forgeries and fakes
Yeah,
and hoaxes. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So that they claim that all of those are hoaxes, but these couple are legit. But like probably they're all
That's how all
hoaxes.
conspiracies go. So
Yeah, tell me about it. So other ones you might have heard of: Loch Ness monster, another
old
popular
Nessie.
cryptid, old
Yeah.
Nessie. Which like this one is where it's in a lake, like it can't even hide anywhere.
All right. So first of all, yeah, the Loch Ness is actually it's a fairly large body of fresh water. So it's in the Scottish Highlands. And so you all know Loch Ness monster. I don't think it, but it's like a hunchback, sort of like long neck body creature kind of thing. So the first recording sighting of Loch Ness monster actually dates back to the 6th century. So this was a long time ago. It was one of our old Christian friends was out there going to save the locals, and he was near the River Ness while on a mission there to convert them, and that's when he had his first sighting. So the modern era of Loch Ness sightings actually doesn't begin until the 1930s. There's not much in between the 6th century and there, but they're typically these things are localized. So you have like the folklore of that area, and that kind of people will see that stuff. But this is when we get the most famous one. So if you've ever seen X-Files or any of like Unsolved Mysteries, the most famous picture was taken in the 1934, and it's called the Surgeon's Photograph. And this was actually published in a newspaper, and it supposedly shows the head of Loch Ness like kind of going up and swooping in the body of water. But the picture is extremely blurry. In the 30s, the resolution of the cameras and the film wasn't that high, and so we don't have this. It actually turned out later that was a hoax, and they were using a toy submarine to like in some photography like shenanigans to make it look like it was farther away than what it was. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
So one more, but kind of the same sort of thing: chupacabra, which means goat sucker in Spanish. It's a legendary creature. It's supposed to like attack and drink the blood of livestock and goats and stuff. It's said to be a hairless creature with like spines and quills, and I it's cool. They did some X-Files episodes on it. Like it's supposed to look like a dog creature with spines running down his back, but in this case, like it's all anecdotal evidence.
Yeah. And the one famous one from like the 2000s, like 2004 in Canavanas, Puerto Rico, it actually turned out to be, I think, like a raccoon with mange. So like the raccoon got mange. So mange is like a skin disease where you lose all your hair. So like it was just really ugly looking and like going around. It was like infected, just like biting the animals, and they were dying. So like that's what it turned out to be. So
so this and many other examples are animals that are cryptids that are probably not real.
Yeah.
But here's the thing: everything's a cryptid until it's not, right? Like an animal that is like seen by the locals and there's stories about it is a cryptid, but sometimes those are real.
Something.
Sometimes. So an example of that is the mountain gorilla, which is a subspecies of gorilla, eastern gorilla, gorilla barangay, and it's found in Rwanda, Uganda, the Congo, and Africa. And so they're known for their thick black fur, for being big, big gorillas, 400 pounds. But the thing was, they used to be considered a cryptid, a legendary creature, just kind of a story made up by the locals, that is until the 20th century when there was an expedition done, and there they are.
We found them.
Sure enough, we found them. Yeah,
Yeah.
not a cryptid anymore.
Now they're classified as an endangered species. So I think there's
Right.
only like 1,000 left in existence. So
Which explains why they were so hard to find. But
yeah.
I think. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You go ahead.
My favorite one is the giant squid, though. Which is a deep sea creature straight out of like Lovecraftian horror, right? Huge squid, and it had been the fodder of sea tales forever. Sailors and fishermen would say that they had seen them or had killed them,
Or they
whatever.
had come up and like devoured a whole ship.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, and like this like all of this stinks of the kind of like legends you hear all the time. There be monsters. It's always portrayed as like a fearsome sea creature, and so people classified as a cryptid. That's nonsense, just tales. Uh, and then they found one. One in the 19th century, 1873. It like washed up in Newfoundland, which is now a province of Canada, but at the time was not. At the time, it was British. And I know that because my grandmother was from Newfoundland and she came to America right after World War II. And she would get livid if you called her Canadian, like fighting mad. She was not Canadian, she was British.
Well, learn something new every day. So
yeah. So it was a cryptid,
but that was the only one that we had, right? So now that we have this evidence of a carcass, like we tried to find one in the wild so we could study them. But over like 150 years, it took us, I think, 130 years of maybe to actually get evidence of one in the wild. And this was actually captured around by a team of Japanese scientists, and they actually had video footage of one, which is pretty cool. So they designed this like lure. Kind of like they basically went fishing for a giant squid, and they had a lure, and then with like a camera on it, and they actually got the giant squid coming up, and they like played with it for hours trying to get it to come into the thing. So
yeah,
you can watch it online.
And so that was down at like 3,000 feet.
Yeah.
So not an easy place to get, right?
No.
So there's some examples of cryptids that have turned out to be true, right? Turned out to be real. So with this, is cryptozoology a legitimate field of study? Is it actually scientific or is it pseudoscience? Because it is right sometimes. And science is right. So
do you want the short answer, which is no?
Let's explain it. So what is pseudoscience? What qualifies something as pseudoscience? Basically, it is some discipline that is pretending to be science. It like wants to take on the prestige of being a science and take kind of like the trappings and language of science without the rigorous investigation and the kind of habits that make science reliable.
Yeah. So, I mean, having those falsifiable claims, predictions, going through peer review processes, having, self-correcting mechanisms that get you back on course in case you deviate, like all those things are absent from pseudoscience.
Yeah. It basically comes down to how it's done. It's not even the topic. It's it's what you're doing and how you're doing it. So cryptozoology has or lacks all of those features of science. The evidence they have for these creatures is anecdotal, typically. Notably, the claims they make that this creature exists, but it's like elusive and hard to find, is completely unfalsifiable, right? It is not the case that you can't prove a negative, because you can prove a negative sometimes, but it is often hard to do. And in the case of Bigfoot does not exist, like to be able to prove that definitively with no shred of doubt would be virtually impossible, right?
But Jordan, they proved it, right? They were right. The giant squid.
Yeah, that's right. They were right this other time, therefore they're right now, right? Yeah, blind squirrels are, even a blind squirrel's right twice a day. So yeah, they don't make falsifiable claims. Even if you go out and do an expedition for the creature and you don't find it, well, that just means you didn't find it. I mean, they didn't find the giant squid for 150 years, right? So,
yeah.
That is one other way that they differ from zoologists, is that zoologists are kind of studying like the ecology and like the ecosystem, whereas the cryptozoologists are getting stories of legends and then like doing an expedition to find that one thing rather than looking at the entire ecosystem. So what about the times they were right, though? What does that tell us?
That just tells us that sometimes anecdotes are right and that you can get lucky.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Occasionally, somebody telling a story is correct, you know?
Oh, yeah. Or that you can have really bad methods and still come to a correct conclusion. Like,
For sure. It happens
yeah.
sometimes. Sometimes you can go about things completely the wrong way and just by accident stumble on the truth, right? And that's the thing. They make all, like, if you look at all of the cryptids that they say exist, if you guess enough, eventually you'll guess some correct things, right? So being correct occasionally doesn't make you scientific. What the scientific method allows you to do is be right consistently and critically to get more right over time, or more accurately, to get less wrong over time.
Yeah. Because typically in science, we're not trying to prove ourselves right, but we're trying to prove ourselves wrong.
Right. And if something resists being proven wrong over time, then it becomes
Yeah.
accepted. So, despite the fact that cryptids have been found, so the fact that something is considered a cryptid now does not mean that it doesn't exist. That doesn't mean that the field is legitimate. It doesn't mean that they go about it in a scientific way. It doesn't mean that we should, because the field has come up with some random good results occasionally, that we should trust it in the future.
Yep.
So that's cryptozoology. And that brings us to the end of the things we were going to talk about. But before we close, we owe you not one, but two fallacies of the day because we forgot to do one last time.
So these are the phallics of the day.
The
No, the
phallicies.
phallici.
Phallicies of the day. Actually, they're
That was a joke.
biasized.
They're biasized, yeah.
Yeah, so we've kind of run through every fallacy we could find several times at this point. So for now, we're going to do biases of the day because there's more of those and we haven't talked about all of them. And they come up all the time. So our first bias of the day is the survivorship bias. This is one of my favorite biases. Actually.
Yeah, I remember the first time you told me about this one, that the World War II airplanes.
Yeah, that's a very famous example. So survivorship bias occurs when you only look at the survivors of a particular thing. So it's kind of like a selection effect where your sample is not representative of the overall population, right? And so the classic example is the airplanes. So I got the Wikipedia up and I'll show that picture in case someone hasn't seen it. So this is the famous picture here. And so the way the story goes is they were looking at ways to reinforce planes in World War II, and they had this data, which is the bullet holes, damage on planes that had made it back to base, right? And so if you were kind of naively looking at this, hey, planes are getting shot in all these places, and they were trying to figure out where should we reinforce, where should we add more armor? You might think, oh, we should add it where they're getting shot, you know? But that's survivorship bias because your sample is not of all planes. Your sample is of the planes that made it back.
Because the planes that didn't make it back got shot potentially somewhere else. Like,
right. So the conclusion that they drew was that we should reinforce the places where they weren't making it back. Reinforce the cockpit and the engines and the other stuff. Right?
Yeah, David, let's put big metal plates on the wings.
Yeah, it's kind of it's obvious when you think about it. But so that's survivorship bias. Another classic example is like if you have a fish net that has holes that are like 6 inches wide.
Mm-hmm.
And you see, and like, oh, look, all the fish in this lake are bigger than 6 inches. What? Crazy. That's because the ones that are smaller aren't making it through your sample, right? Okay. So yeah, another example of this is medical anecdotes. Bad news travels fast. You hear when like there's a vaccine, you'll hear every single time somebody gets sick or gets a rash or whatever, you hear about that, right? You don't hear about the hundreds of thousands of people who didn't get sick. Nobody talks about them.
It's also like on Amazon reviews, like this has 500 negative reviews. That's because the 10,000 people who didn't bother, they don't know issues with this. So
right, that's one thing. But so speaking of reviews, that's actually a great example of this next bias, which is the sample size bias. And sample sizes, it's weird because it's something that people seem to struggle to understand and yet have an intuitive understanding of it, right? So people want to look at like you see it all the time with anecdotal evidence. They talk about like this happened to me or my brother had this happen to them and like therefore this is true, right?
We have an N of 1.
Yeah, you have a sample size of 1. And don't get me wrong, that can be a valuable source of information about like whether a restaurant sucks or something, But that doesn't necessarily tell you like what's going on with the entire population. And so the way I like to demonstrate this, like people, you'll try to tell someone this, like you only have a sample size of 1. Well, my cousin said it, so it happened. It's like, bro, if you saw a product on Amazon, would you rather have the one that's 5 stars but has 5 reviews, or 4.5 stars with 10,000 reviews?
Well, I know which one I would rather have, but
and like most people,
but this one has 5 stars though.
right. Most people get that because
Yeah.
sample size. If you have a large number of people, it's less likely that you're getting a biased sample size. And so this can also be compounded by the previous bias of survivorship. You can, have those sort of things running together. So the ways you're going to avoid these kind of biases, basically just by understanding that they exist.
Yeah,
right?
Educating yourself. Yeah.
Right. You have to always be thinking, like, whenever you get a sample set, is my sample representative? And in what ways might it not be representative? What could be going into this? A great example from earlier was the Oak Ridge National Labs study, right?
Yeah, so many things wrong with that study.
Yeah. In that case, good sample size, 2,000 people is a respectable sample size. But like this happens all the time in like psychology papers. Like they do a sample and it's of like the students at the campus. Well, that's not representative of the country, No. So you have to just keep in mind whenever you're looking at data, try to be thinking of the ways in which this might not be representative of the whole. And as a general rule of thumb, the more data you have, the less likely it is to be flawed in some way, because the flaws will kind of cancel each other out.
And be asking those questions too, like what was the sample size? What was the sample representative of? Was there any survivorship bias in place here? Like you can look at that and you can get most of that stuff from looking at the study, because most papers will list their methodologies for that study and tell you exactly how they did it. So,
and a really good paper will talk about these problems. If it's a good paper, in their discussion, they'll mention, hey, our sample is only from this university, so here's how we corrected for that, or that might be a weak point, or so. Like a good paper will acknowledge those things.
Yeah, but you have to read past the abstract.
Right. Yeah, you have to read past the first line of the abstract, which for some people is just too much, I guess.
Well, if you made it this far in the video, you're definitely the kind of person who reads past the first
abstract.
line.
So good job. So that's our show. Thanks for coming, everybody. We really appreciate it. Keep those suggestions coming. We do keep a list of all of them. So we'll try to make this a regular thing. Whenever we get to a critical mass of stuff, we'll do a grab bag like this to hit all the little stuff. You and like every psychology paper publisher ever. It's a very common bias. I as an analyst, I see this all the time. In fact, I had the hardest time explaining sample size bias. Like we did a survey of like all of the people at our company and like how they felt about things. And like, they're like, well, how do people in this city that work in this particular part of the business who are full-time at midnight, how do they feel about it? I'm like, that's like one guy. Like, how does Bob feel about it?
How does Frank the janitor feel about it?
Right. Yeah. Anyways, so thanks for coming. Keep those suggestions coming. We do keep track of them, and we'll try to hit as many of them as we can. Coming up in the future, we have a date set to record with Hugh Ferry of Shroud of Turin fame. The super skeptic. We're going to be talking about, we're going to be basically scraping through the comments of our Shroud of Turin videos and seeing all the little things that we didn't talk about before, and seeing what Hugh has to say about him. Hugh is, if you've looked at all into Shroud of Turin studies, you've heard Hugh's name. So, so we're going to be talking to him, I think. That should be coming out. And what else do we have?
We'll have another mythicism topic coming out in the future, but we're actually needing topics. So if you want something covered, send it our way, and we may just do a deep dive on it. So
yeah. Okay, cool. Well, do that. Like, comment, subscribe, do all the YouTube stuff, feed the algorithm. Until next time, remember, you've always got reason to doubt.
Peace out.